Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Geraghty.
And welcome, everyone, to the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We are in the midst of our very prestigious year-end 2018 Three Martini Lunch Awards. Many different Crystal Martini glasses have been handed out. We are in now the fifth of our 6 installments. Our final one will be on Monday, on New Year's Eve. Those will be prestigious awards, of course, in the final installment. But today we've got 3 big ones as well. Most overreported story of the year, most underreported story of the year, and the best story of 2018. So, Jim, no shortage of nominees for this one. What's the most overreported story of 2018?
I'm going to have to kind of lump some things together, but I'll just do it in a series of questions, Greg. How many times was John Kelly, the former chief of staff or outgoing chief of staff of of President Trump, how many times was it reported he was leaving the administration?
Lots.
All right. How many times when we heard that Trump was thinking of firing Jeff Sessions? Yes, he did ask for his resignation after the election, but we heard it throughout the year. We saw similar stories with Rod Rosenstein, and I went back and I checked, and there were plenty of times we heard that Trump wanted to fire Mueller, was thinking of firing Mueller, was telling people he was firing Mueller, doing everything except, as of this recording, firing Robert Mueller. So I think last year I picked the palace intrigue, and you could argue this is something of a variation of that. Look, there's been an enormous amount of churn in this administration. I would argue too much. I don't think it helps if you have, more than half your cabinet stepping down after 2 years. I think this indicates a bit about Trump as a manager. I think it indicates how he's difficult to work with. He's made some bad picks. I think some folks have. I think he trusted some people he shouldn't have trusted. But all in all, I think this relentless coverage and this speculation kind of, look, first of all, there are a ton of false alarms. I think I remember way back when, this is going to be a deep cut, Greg, when Politico was getting started. I believe this was in the run up to 2008. They had a story that said then Attorney General Alberto Gonzales was on his way out and that he was either going to resign or get fired. And nobody else had the story, and I was not in great connections with the Bush White House, but I kind of asked around, and nobody said they'd heard of it. Gonzales did leave the administration 8 months later. So there is a school of thought to journalism that if you write a certain story that someone is going to resign, well, sooner or later they will either resign, be fired, or die. To paraphrase the old saying on SportsCenter, he's listed as day-to-day, but then again, so are all of us. So there is this sense that if you write this story, particularly in the Trump administration, quick, pick a random person, Ben Carson over at HUD. Trump is thinking of dismissing, but Ben Carson is going to leave the. Now, here's the thing. It may be true. It may not be true. Eventually, it would be true. But I don't think that's good journalism. I don't think the public is well served by that. And I think in the end, I don't know how much these cabinet secretaries make huge differences, particularly when they're coming and going so quickly. There's an argument, I believe Robert Reich, for all of his flaws, had a really fascinating kind of memoir about being Bill Clinton's labor secretary. And he talks about probably the most great personal experience about what it's like to be a cabinet secretary and how spectacularly unimportant you are and how little ability to change things in your department you have. And so I think it's kind of a fair question to think: do we pay too much attention to this? And and considering how often the speculation is either premature or wrong, I think it's time to, if DC press corps, to turn away from that and only report when it's more solid that a personnel change is coming.
Jim, what should be the threshold? How long after a rumor of a departure is published should we give for this to play out before we can declare them wrong? Is it a couple weeks, a month? Or what's the best way to determine whether this is just a bunch of speculation or whether there's something to it?
Different folks give you different reasons, but I'll put it about 6 weeks, let's say. I'm going to be generous, right? Maybe somebody's been talking about being on the way out and they kind of, murmur about it. They tell people they're thinking about it or something like that. Like, again, I'm thinking about leaving. I'm thinking about quitting. Look, I'm sure everybody who works in this administration has probably thought that, if not on a daily basis, on a fairly regular basis. But, We all saw the facial expressions of John Kelly behind the president, but, he hung on there as long as he could.
Absolutely. All right, for my nominee and my award for Overreported Story of the Year, it's really hard to pass up ones that involve the media, like Jim Acosta losing his hard pass for a few days there. But I'm going to go back to Kavanaugh here and go with the baseless Kavanaugh accusations. And I'm not talking about Christine Blasey Ford, and I might not even be talking about Deborah Ramirez. That was the story that Ronan Farrow and one other reporter broke for the New Yorker there. But both of those stories had a lot of details missing from the allegations, which is why I think a lot of people ultimately gave Kavanaugh the benefit of the doubt. But if it had stopped there, you could understand the media spending a lot of time on those allegations. But then, of course, our good friend Michael Avenatti butted in with Julie Swetnick, and she didn't just talk about sexual assault at parties. No. Brett Kavanaugh was organizing gang rapes, and then she did a TV interview, and it boiled down to, well, I didn't actually see that, but he did, hand out red Solo cups. But that didn't stop the media from going with it and listing however many accusers they thought they were up to there, 7 or 8 at one point, I think it was. And then you had these other people about being raped in a car and raped on a boat. And ultimately these people, some of them never even went on the record. Others eventually recanted their allegations. Chuck Grassley, the Senate Judiciary Committee chairman, referring multiple of accusers over to the Justice Department for possible prosecution because it simply got ridiculous. It got to be a piling on exercise, which in the end may well have actually helped Brett Kavanaugh because it just looked like every Democrat with an opportunity was getting in on this. But the media, instead of actually trying to vet these stories, just decided they wanted the number of accusers out there and more salacious accusations, even if there weren't any facts to back it up. And because they wanted Brett Kavanaugh gone, they just went with him anyway. And the credibility of the media, which is already in tatters, was damaged greatly even more.
That is a good choice. This may reflect the era of clickbait journalism. People who click on your articles, it doesn't matter. A click because people like your article. If people click on it, read it, and like it. If people click on it, read it, and think it's the stupidest thing they've ever read, the click is the same, right? There is no financial incentive for writing high quality just to get people to click, and that's why you get these ridiculous headlines and stuff like that. And you kind of wonder how much this has affected journalism as a whole with this mentality of, somebody else reported X. We need our own version of that story up saying X, even if we have no idea if X is accurate or not. We'll just say, well, so-and-so is reporting X without actually trying to do any legwork to see if we think it's true, if any of our sources can verify it or contradict it or anything like that. That's not really value-added journalism, and I think it's kind of frustrating to see so many people, particularly when the source is someone like Avenatti or somebody like that, who has less than sterling when it comes to accurately presenting information to the public.
All right. Well, while the media was going through a lot of ink and a lot of airtime on those and other stories that didn't deserve it, other stories fell off the radar. Jim, what's the most underreported story of 2018?
Yeah, for a while I thought about calling this the worst reported story, but actually I think I want to. It fits as underreported. We all remember the god awful shooting at Stoneman Douglas High out in Broward County. What people did not pay nearly as much attention to. The Washington Post wrote about it. Certainly some folks in conservative media paid attention to it, but people really didn't, it didn't get the massive around the clock, serious scrutiny that it deserved. At one point, Broward County schools had more in-school arrests than any other district in Florida. 2013, school board and the sheriff's office agree on this new policy to discontinue police referrals for a dozen infractions ranging from drug use to assault. And lo and behold, once they put that in place, the number of school-based arrests plummets by 63% from 2012 to 2016. And lots of folks, including the Obama administration's Department of Education, are lauded the reforms and say this is a role model for other students, for other schools. 2015, they invite the district superintendent to the White House for an event called Rethink Discipline. It was about transforming policies in the school climate, the idea that schools are being too harsh on students, too draconian, and we don't want to, label kids with a criminal record too early in life. And, as a result of that, the best way to do it is to not put them into the police system. Don't call the cops. Settle this with school disputes. Give the kids counseling, and things will turn out great. Well, in some cases, maybe it does work out great. I'm broadly supportive of the general gist of criminal justice reform. But one of the persons who was affected by this was confessed killer Nicholas Cruz, who was emotionally disturbed, expelled for bringing weapons to school, but he was never arrested for any of these things. And because he was never arrested, he did not have a criminal record, which meant he could purchase a rifle. If he'd been arrested, he would not be able to do that. But this is his list of incidents involves assaulting students. Records say he was well known to school and mental health authorities. If he had an arrest record, he would not have been able to legally purchase the gun. Oh, by the way, maybe at some point that would have had him behind bars, and he would not have been in position to commit that atrocity. Now, you may be also recalling that, this is the sort of thing that would ask really tough questions of the sheriff. This is the infamous Broward County Sheriff Scott Israel, who did get asked about the program in an interview with Jake Tapper. And he said, well, it's an excellent program. It's helping many, many people. What this program does is not put a person at 14, 15, 16 years old into the criminal justice system. Yes, that's exactly the point, because they weren't in the criminal justice system. This guy was allowed to buy a gun. The police, he says, can't be faulted because there's no malfeasance or misfeasance if you don't know about something. That's exactly the point. The program was designed to ensure the police did not know about this, because if the police knew about this, they would have to prosecute this. And all of a sudden you'd have teenagers having criminal records and, presumably getting them on the wrong course in life. In some cases, maybe that is the right decision. In the case of Nicholas Cruz, it was a catastrophic decision. And that was much more worthy of attention and discussion than yet another gun control law getting tossed on the pile. All of us saw those interviews with Scott Israel and the nonsense answers he gave to tough questions. All of us saw that CNN town hall 2 or 3 days after the shooting, in which Dana Lash was basically blamed for the shooting. And, this is an absolute appalling chapter in American journalism. I appreciate Jake Tapper's effort at sort of a makeup call a few days later in his interviews with Israel. But all in all, the fact that so much scrutiny went out to the NRA and guns and, all that kind of stuff, and so little scrutiny went into the school's policies was probably the single worst malpractice by American journalism in 2018.
Jim, this is amazing. First of all, I think that's an excellent choice. I chose the exact same event, but in a different way, which tells you how poorly the media did on this story, because once they found students like David Hugg and Emma Gonzalez and Cameron Caskey, until he had some introspection and stepped back a little bit, they had these kids. They threw them out there, and they loved every minute of it. As long as the kids were willing to do interviews, they were going to keep doing this story. I mean, they literally sent their anchors to camp out in Broward County for days and days and days because they had this pipeline of the students. But what I'm going to focus on here is what didn't get a lot of attention. You covered it extensively, to your credit, as did folks over at Hot Air and a lot of other places that were interested in the truth instead of the narrative. And that's how the Broward County Sheriff's Office and others completely dropped the ball on this. In addition to the policy that you just mentioned that left law enforcement and gun dealers in the dark, you've got the school resource officer, Scott Peterson, whose job is to protect students and to engage threats on campus. If one arises, well, one arose, he decided to stand down, and we'll never know how many lives could have been saved had he intervened. But ultimately, he didn't do that. And then you had the officers arriving. They decided not to go in. They were in a stand and hold position. The captain there, Scott Israel, admitted later in the year, was probably in that position because of a diversity promotion, not necessarily because it was the most qualified person for the job. Ultimately, a lot of standing around. You had first responders from other departments, like paramedics and so forth, begging to go in, and the sheriff's office said no, 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 no. And ultimately, the mainstream media, if you were to ask them today what happened and why so many lives were lost at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, it's because of the NRA and it's because of the availability of guns, not because the people who were tasked with protecting people and had supposedly had a plan in place completely dropped the ball.
Probably says something, Greg, that both of us found the same event to be in the worst moments of American journalism of 2018. And, in a better world, this would prompt some soul searching, not because you and I are such unbelievably wise and learned figures, although we've both worked in this business for a long time. But I think we speak for a lot of Americans who expect our media institutions, look, tell us the who, what, when, where, and why, right? Just tell us what happened. And there's a lot of room in that. This was a big, complicated story to tell. I'm not saying that there could be no discussion of gun control or something like that, but in the end, gun control laws had, there were very few gun control laws being discussed lately that would have changed this. And I think, a lot of this is the story after a lot of these mass shootings. And it's deeply infuriating about how quickly it turns from everyone who knew the shooter, who apparently had plenty of warning, everyone kind of, in case after case, we hear people saying, yeah, this guy, everybody knew this guy was a ticking time bomb. We told corporate HR, we told school officials, as I've pointed out time and time again, if you really think someone is a dangerous threat to others, do not tell your company's human resources office. Human resources office is to make sure they don't get sued. That, right. Stopping dangerous criminals is not the HR office's job. It's not school officials' job. All of them are terrified of lawsuits. They are not going to do anything. Tell the cops. It's the job of the police, and they're the only ones who are authorized to arrest people, or until we get more people passing these sort of temporary restraining orders to remove firearms that have been discussed by my colleague David French. Until that becomes the law in more places, this is what you got to do. That's where we are with this, and instead we get this very convenient narrative of, we very quickly go from the person who did it, and obviously in many cases the serious mental health issues, the serious many signals that this was coming down the pike, and instead we start talking about the menace of America's gun culture, as if some guy who goes out hunting on the weekends and is sitting in a deer stand out somewhere in the before dawn, or as if he's the real menace to America's schools instead of people much closer to home.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, let's end on a hopefully brighter note. Jim, best story of 2018.
Yeah, I mean, this was not a terribly underreported story, although maybe an underappreciated story. A couple of days ago, we talked about there was some slightly economic news in the coming year. But look, 2018 was a really good year for the economy. And it's not like you got ignored. It got a decent amount of attention. Every month, the job numbers would come out. Unemployment rate is pretty low. A very tumultuous year on the stock market, not as good as 2017 was. But the tax cuts started kicking into effect, and people just, economic confidence, consumer confidence was up. I believe last I checked, something in the neighborhood of 7 million unfilled jobs in this country. Finally saw some good numbers on wage growth. This is pretty close to the Goldilocks economy. This is pretty much, the unemployment's low, wages are going up. There's not runaway inflation. We had a rough patch with gas prices, but they're coming back down towards the end of the year. This is a pretty darn good economic environment, and it certainly did not help House Republicans. May have helped a couple of Senate Republicans, but all in all, if you look at the Great Recession, it's probably one of the most consequential events of our lifetimes, Greg, affecting so many tens of millions, hundreds of millions of Americans, and affecting their career trajectories, their mortgages, their hopes, their dreams, all this kind of stuff got put on hold as Lehman went down and the Wall Street meltdown and everything that happened in late 2008, 2009, spreading. And it really took a good chunk of the Obama years for us to kind of slowly, steadily pull out of it. Had 2 good years of the economy, and it's welcome. Certainly hope it continues, and I don't know if it's certain that it's going to. But look, in a country that's still got a lot of problems, it does look like in terms of economic growth, a lot of things are going right, and that's the best story of 2018, I would argue.
Yeah, very, very strong case. I strongly considered that one. Anytime you get 4% growth in a quarter and the lowest unemployment rate in about 50 years, you're doing something right. I like the idea of picking one that everyone should be able to agree on, and that's certainly one of them. For mine, I'm going for that same theme, but I'm going halfway around the world. It's almost impossible to find a story now where somebody won't at least find something to gripe about, like finding years-old tweets when somebody wins a Heisman Trophy, for example. But other than some debate about why the kids got in the cave, the rescue of the Thai soccer team was one thing that kind of galvanized the world this year and really captivated everyone, because just about everyone can relate to trying to rescue a child or a group of children from this perilous situation with rising water and worrying that someone was going to die. One person did die, and that was the equivalent of a Thai Navy SEAL. But these divers, which were just painstaking work, going through all these different sharp crevices, obviously in the dark. I think they did have some sort of lights with them, but hour after hour, day after day, doing whatever it took to get to those kids, teaching them how to swim to the extent and or at least hang on so they could navigate the very difficult passageways out. All the kids saved. Heroes abound with the divers and the coaches for at least keeping the kids calm, maybe not for leading them into the cave in the first place. But Jim, it's not always that we get really happy endings, and we got one there, and that was a good moment.
Yeah, maybe the best human interest story of the year. I mean, human interest might seem a little light for something that's life and death. But I don't know about you, Greg. I can't wait for the movie.
Yes, I'm sure it'll be a good one. Let's hope so. Jim, have a great weekend. When we come back on Monday, it'll be New Year's Eve, and we'll have our biggest awards of the year. So folks don't want to miss that. In the meantime, you have a good weekend, and we'll see you then.
See you on Monday, Greg.
Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Have a great weekend, everyone, and tune in on Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.